Hello, hello, and welcome to an interesting decision you've made. You've clicked on a video and said, I would like recommendations for black authors. And who better to tell that than a white British man? For those that don't know, because I think a lot of World Black History Month is February, because apparently you like to make it the shortest month of the year, which is a statement. We have it in October. So Black History Month is this month in Britain, and as a result I thought I'd make just a quick little list on what you should be reading. What I've tried to do is I've tried to span different time periods, different genres, etc. And we're going to begin with just two honourable mentions of books that I enjoyed but didn't have all that much to say. The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter is the first book. I actually have it here, let me get it. I read this when I first started reading again because it just got picked up by Orbit. That was scary. It just got picked up by Orbit at the time, and I was interested. I'd heard Daniel Green chat shit about it and everything. Everyone was talking about it, and I picked it up, and I thought it was good. I don't think the story is for me. I enjoyed the world building and everything, but in terms of a revenge story, I'm not particularly a revenge person, and this is fueled by it. The first book is very much a person's descent into revenge and how it becomes all-encompassing. I have to be in the right mood for that, and I feel like what I'm going to do is, my plan is I own the second book, evidently I enjoyed it enough. I'm going to wait for the third one and then reread ready for that third book. I think that's how I'm going to consume the series now, rather than just read the second book out of context. But if you're in the fantasy realm and you want just like a fast-flowing, adrenaline-filled revenge explosion, then that's the book for you. The other book I don't have here with me is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. The book follows a young protagonist, a young girl who witnesses the murder of her friend by a police officer, and it becomes about her experience as she's trying to deal with this, as the media portrays her, the actual neighbourhood she lives in portrays her, her family, her friends, her boyfriend who is a white boy. All of these things transcend and culminate with each other. It's a very easy read in terms of the writing style and the prose, but the actual subject matter is extremely dense and gives a lot to think about. So if you're looking for a modern set story, then this is the one. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start more on the fantasy sci-fi side, then blend into something that kind of sits in the middle, it kind of is a genre defier, and then go into literary. So the first book is, well, I don't actually have the first one here with me, but The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, part of the Broken Earth trilogy, would be what I say. Because one thing I think is central, one thing I think is a definite need when you're addressing Black History Month in general, is to reflect on that history. And one thing the Broken Earth trilogy and the next series I'm going to talk about does incredibly well is drawing on real life instances and real life atrocities. Fifth Season is set in a kind of alternate reality of Earth where these horrific fifth seasons occur. It's where there's just kind of the ultimate destruction to the Earth. Be it volcanoes, earthquakes, etc., etc. It's usually a combination of a bunch. Decimate the Earth, and the humans are just kind of clinging on and trying to survive. And we're following three characters as they are going through around a fifth season. And so I found it extremely easy to read. It's also a very nice length of around 400 pages, I think, which sometimes when you get into a fantasy, you're expecting some 600-page monster. Whereas my experience with Fifth Season was extremely accessible and extremely readable. And then what I was saying is drawing on the real world aspects that you have descriptions of slavery, servitude, eugenics, a lot of intricate world building developed from real world instances. And when you read it under that lens, it deepens the actual text itself, because you understand what they're trying to say and what they're reflecting on. And then leading into another series that is very much in the same vein. This one is more an author. This is an author that I believe people should read. And there's Octavia E. Butler. Specifically the two that I've read. I've only read 2 books by her, which are Kindred and then Wild Seed. I read them both this year. Kindred is a time travel story about a woman in 1970s America, a black woman who finds herself collapsing, and when she wakes up, she is in the antebellum South, and she finds herself next to a river, hears a noise, hears someone crying out, goes to save them, drags them out, and it is a white boy. And then the story revolves around her coming back to the present day and going back, and when she goes back, she finds that time has gone by, and it's about the relationship between her and this boy that she keeps on coming back and meeting. It is horrific. It is brutally told. The prose just slaps you around the face, and that holds over into Wild Seed as well. Wild Seed is an extremely interesting book that follows 2 immortal beings. One is Doro, who is a 2,700-year-old ancient who takes bodies. The only way that they can survive, they're like a spirit that inhabits other people's bodies. So they take over someone, and the person they were in dies. And so the only way they can live is by killing others. And then there is Anyanwu, a 300-year-old woman who can shapeshift, she's like a healer. And so there's automatically there someone who can only live by killing, someone who can live to save others. There's a natural antithesis to each other, but they find themselves drawn and in a relationship. And this once again deals with very predominantly slavery and eugenics. It is also harrowing. It's brutal. It's magical, mystical. It's engrossing. I cannot describe to you how much I thoroughly enjoyed reading Wild Seed, despite how brutal and terrifying it is. Even though it's a book from the 1970s, it felt so remarkably fresh and unlike anything I've ever read before, which I think says a lot about Octavia Butler's just individuality and brilliance. From there, we're going to drift into the quasi magical realism with The Mermaid of Black Conch. I've recently spoke about this. I really enjoyed this. It is about 1970s Caribbean island called Black Conch in a village called, St. Constance, where David, who is one of our protagonists, he kind of sits on the seafront. He smokes all day and he plays the guitar. And a mermaid out at sea hears him, and they kind of have a recognition of each other. And then it cuts to the perspective of a white father and son who are going out fishing in the local competition. That's like, it kind of brings all of these villages, like all of these islands together, and they all have this fishing competition. And hearing the boat, like feeling the vibration of the boat, the mermaid believes that it's David playing his guitar, and is eventually caught. And so we then proceed from there as David and the mermaid kind of develop a rapport. It deals a lot with intersectionality in terms of just the different, the minute and nuanced ways that you can be discriminated on. How you're discriminated differently to if you're a black woman compared to a black man. How you're discriminated differently if you are white and disabled, etc. It deals a lot with all of these different ideas in a really succinct and well-developed way. I really enjoyed it. I think it deserves a better shout. I also think really gorgeous looking books. Like, no matter what edition you get, it's a really fantastic looking book. Then we end up in the literary world. And we end up in the literary world with The Long Song by Andrea Levy. One important thing to note about both this and The Mermaid of Black Conch is that they talk in the dialect of the characters. They talk in the vernacular. So it may take a while for you to adjust if you're not used to Caribbean language, if you're not used to Creole languages, then it may take you a while to adjust. But once you're there, you're going to be fine. this is about it's told from the perspective of a character who grew up at the end of slavery, at the abolishment of slavery. They were a house slave, and they have spent their life working in this house for this white woman, and it's this horrific reflection, on slavery and the aftermath, and the questioning, what is it to be free? How can you be free when you've been released from this horrific, trauma-filled time? And if you can find that little bit of freedom, are white peoples willing to let you have it? Or will they find a way of removing that again? This is told in a very funny tone. The narrator is extremely funny in quite a lot of instances, which helps blend together this idea of rebellion, how people rebel, the small ways in which slaves would poke and tease at their whatever the fuck you want to call them. And it just kind of, it produces this image of there are so many different ways to rebel, and just because someone isn't outside with their pitchfork raising it up in the air doesn't mean that not everyone is trying to rebel in their own way. And I've really enjoyed this when I read it. I read it for university. Then to absolutely the most notable name on this list. Even if you haven't read any of her work, most people have heard of Toni Morrison. And I'm going to particularly say Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which was her debut novel. And the fact that this book is a debut is one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my entire life. So I've now read 3 books by Toni Morrison, and I think The Bluest Eye is my favourite. What we're following is the character of Pecola, who is a young black girl, really, in 1940s Ohio, who she dreams that she's going to wake up and have blue eyes. She dreams of what, in her opinion, is kind of the innocence and the purity of blue eyes, and of being what is basically white in this image. It follows her. Toni Morrison. One thing to get around with Toni Morrison is that she writes in a very non-linear fashion. You will have characters that are related to each other, but you are reading from their perspective 30 years before. You're reading from the perspective of Pecola's parents as children. You're reading all kinds of different narrative viewpoints, and this is brutal. This is absolutely harrowing. Has one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read. 2 of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read, easily. It is, I don't know how to describe it. It is brutally disgusting, and it is one of the most beautifully written things in terms of being able to deal with something so horrible and so unforgivable with such nuance and poise, and to show it really breaks down trauma. It really breaks down the idea of monsters aren't just monsters in most cases. Monsters quite often are created, they are developed, and who is developing them? In a world where people are segregated, in a world where black people are beaten and killed, who is developing the internalized monstrosity that is developing in certain people in black communities? And of course that leads back to white people. And yeah, it's so fucked up. It's super short, so I would recommend reading it if you're just like, I don't know. I was not I didn't know what I was going into, and I was shocked. But ultimately, it was fantastic, brilliant. Once again, God, that is my list. That is what there are 5 authors and then 2 honourable mentions. Would 100% pick them up. If you have any recommendations for me, please also let me know, because despite reading some black authors, I need to expand myself to a lot more. I feel like I've read a lot of notable names in terms of, if you're going to pick a genre and be like, who is the biggest black author, then N.K. Jemisin, Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, they're going to be the ones that rock up. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. And as always, have a nice rest of your day.